There's something deeply human about the need to belong, to feel safe in a system that tells you what to do, how to live, and what to believe. But there's a cost to that comfort, a quiet trade-off that often goes unnoticed. The moment a system begins to reward obedience, it stops rewarding curiosity. And when that system is religion, the trade-off isn't just personal, it's cultural, it's historical. It shapes the way generations are taught to think, or not to think.
Most religious systems don't ask you to understand. They ask you to obey. That's the metric for goodness. Not how much you've questioned, but how well you've followed. Obedience is built in as a virtue. In fact, it's usually the first lesson a child learns in a religious household. God knows you don't. The Bible, the Quran, the Torah, they aren't laid out like puzzles to be solved. They're presented as answers you must accept. And it's not accidental, it's structural. When you're told that morality comes from a book, and that questioning that book is sin, you've already left reason behind. You're being asked to replace intellectual independence with submission. The smarter you are, the more dangerous your mind becomes. Not to yourself, but to the structure around you. Intelligence, if left unchecked, naturally leads to skepticism. But skepticism, in religious contexts, is often labeled as rebellion, or worse, as evil.
This is especially obvious in religious education. In many religious schools, you're not taught how to think. You're taught what to think. Critical reasoning isn't rewarded. Recitation is. The student who memorizes scripture is praised. The one who asks, "But why does this make sense?" is gently, or not so gently, silenced. That conditioning runs deep. Even outside of formal religious institutions, the social pressure to conform can be overwhelming. Communities built around faith often equate loyalty with righteousness. So asking difficult questions isn't just seen as intellectual defiance, it's seen as betrayal. You're not just doubting a belief, you're threatening the social glue that holds the group together. And so people learn to suppress their doubts. They internalize the idea that faith means surrender, not exploration, that the good person trusts the system, even when it contradicts their own reason. Think about the psychological toll that takes. You're effectively told, if your logic contradicts the scripture, then your logic is flawed. If your conscience challenges a commandment, your conscience is deceiving you. That's not just anti-intellectual, that's anti-human. The irony is that many religions claim to value wisdom, but in practice, wisdom is only celebrated when it aligns with doctrine. You can be as brilliant as you like, so long as your conclusions don't challenge the core narrative. In that way, intelligence is tolerated, but only within a very narrow lane. Step outside it, and suddenly, you're the heretic. Historically, some of the greatest minds in philosophy, science, and art were condemned by religious authorities, not because they were immoral, but because they were independent. Socrates was accused of corrupting youth because he encouraged them to question authority. Galileo was placed under house arrest for suggesting the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. In both cases, the crime wasn't violence. It was thought. And the message is clear. Think, but don't think too much. Obedience, on the other hand, is always safe. The obedient believer is never punished for being wrong, only for being disloyal. You can hold beliefs that are absurd, disproven, even harmful. But as long as those beliefs are shared by the group, they are protected. They are sanctified. You're rewarded not for insight, but for alignment. This kind of reward structure affects more than just theology. It shapes behavior. People learn to navigate life not by asking what's right, but by asking what's allowed. They're less concerned with what's true and more focused on what's permitted. The moral compass doesn't point inward. It points upward, toward an invisible authority figure who holds all the answers, even when those answers don't make sense. In psychology, this creates a type of learned helplessness. People begin to doubt their own judgment. They assume that if they can't understand a rule, the problem is with them, not the rule. This is how obedience becomes internalized. Over time, you stop needing external pressure to conform. You start policing yourself. That self-censorship can feel like humility, but it's not. It's fear in disguise. The fear of punishment, the fear of exile, the fear of being wrong in a system that doesn't allow mistakes. But here's the paradox. True intelligence requires making mistakes. It requires questioning. It thrives on uncertainty. Intelligence isn't about having answers. It's about knowing how to find them. And that's incompatible with a system that insists all the answers have already been given, carved in stone, immune to revision. In religious systems, the story is already written. Your role is to accept it. And the more completely you accept it, the more virtuous you're considered. In other words, your worth is measured by your conformity, not your understanding. This creates a subtle but powerful incentive structure. The quiet thinkers, the ones who question in the dark, they carry a burden of guilt. Not because they've done harm, but because they've dared to think beyond the script. Meanwhile, the loud believers, the ones who never doubt, never challenge, never stray, are lifted up as models of moral purity. But is that really morality? Or is it just compliance? When obedience is praised more than understanding, the result isn't a better society. It's a quieter one, a more fragile one, a culture that looks unified on the surface, but beneath that surface is full of silenced minds and swallowed doubts. What's often overlooked is that critical thinking isn't the enemy of morality. It's the foundation of it. If you're not allowed to question a rule, how can you be sure it's just? If you can't challenge a belief, how can you be sure it's true? Blind obedience may produce harmony, but it doesn't produce wisdom. There's a reason the most progressive changes in history didn't come from those who obeyed the status quo, but from those who challenged it. Whether it was the abolition of slavery, the advancement of science, or the expansion of human rights, these things happened in spite of religious obedience, not because of it. And yet, many religious institutions still insist that obedience is the highest good, that salvation comes not through insight or empathy, but through surrender. But if morality depends on surrender, then we've reduced ethics to dogma, and in that world, the thinking person becomes the enemy. So what does it mean to value intelligence in a world that rewards obedience? It means being willing to stand alone, to risk being misunderstood, to question, even when the answers are uncomfortable. And maybe most of all, it means trusting your own capacity to reason, not because you're always right, but because you're capable of learning, because truth isn't handed down, it's uncovered. And that requires effort, honesty, and sometimes disobedience. Obedience may keep you safe, but intelligence gives you freedom. And when you have to choose between the two, you should at least be aware of the cost, not just to yourself, but to the world you're helping shape. Because in the end, a society that punishes intelligence in favor of obedience is a society that stops growing. It stops adapting. It stops thinking. And eventually, it forgets how. And maybe that's the real danger, not just in religion, but in any system that demands loyalty at the expense of thought. Because the moment obedience becomes more important than understanding, we lose the very thing that makes us human.